There we go. All right. And share my screen. Okay, so here we are. And we are on Great Turning Points, Opera Edition Part 2. And in addition to opera, we're going to start off with a little bit of a palate cleanser today. And I'm going to tell you this is my favorite story, my favorite little story that I uncovered when I was studying for my doctoral comps.
Excuse me, Michael. Before
yeah.
you get started, could you mute everybody too, please?
Oh, right, of course. Thank you for
Thank
reminding
you.
me. Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you, Marta. Okay, everyone's muted and everybody's got their video off. Okay, good. So let me go back to where we were. Good. All right, so, and you can unmute yourself when we come back to questions and all of that. So as I was about to say, as most of you have heard by now, when you're studying for your doctoral comps, we've just studied all of music history for 1,000 years, and you just study everything, and you don't know what you're going to be called upon to write essays on in the 14 hours of comprehensive exams. So one of the weird stories I came across that has become one of my favorite stories in opera is a story of a gentleman named Lorenzo da Ponte. Now, most of you are probably not familiar with his name. It doesn't come up. It's hardly a household name. But he lived one of the most notoriously fascinating lives of anyone I ever read about. And I'm going to take you very briefly through this, my favorite of all stories of the period. So Lorenzo da Ponte was born in 1749 in Venice, and he was born actually with the name Emanuele Conegliano. However, he was born to a Jewish family, and they converted to Catholicism in 1764. And as was the tradition at the time, converts would often take the name of the bishop or priest who baptized them into the Roman Catholic Church. In this case, it was the Bishop of Ceneda, and at that point, he became Lorenzo da Ponte. So several years later, Lorenzo da Ponte he was ordained as a priest himself in 1773. And outside of Venice, he became the priest at the Church of San Luca. However, this is where everything went awry. He took a mistress, had 2 children, and then he was, in 1779, brought up on trial for, let me read this exactly, for public concubinage and for abduction of a respectable woman. So he was found to be guilty of these charges, and he was banished from Venice for the next 15 years, at which point he moved to Austria. Now, of course, he had a perfect command of Italian, and he was teaching Italian and tutoring in Italian while he was there and meeting other Italian citizens. And who did he come to know but Antonio Salieri on the left here? And Salieri helped to introduce him around, and eventually, because of his command of the language, helped him become a librettist. And he started writing libretti, and he ended up writing 3 of the most famous libretti in history for Mozart. In 1786, he wrote the libretto for the opera A Marriage of Figaro, followed by Don Giovanni and Così fan tutte. So 1790 was right before Mozart's death. And 1790 was also the year of Emperor Joseph's death. Now, Emperor Joseph, of course, was the main benefactor for Mozart's operas and for this gentleman as well. So when Emperor Joseph II died, Lorenzo da Ponte lost his main source of income. And he was trying to figure out what to do, and he was really having trouble making ends meet once again. So by 1792, he decided he needed to leave Venice and seek work elsewhere. He couldn't go back to Venice, to leave Vienna. So he couldn't go back to Venice. He was still in exile at that point for another 2 years. What he did have in hand, though, was a letter of recommendation from Emperor Joseph's sister, Queen Marie Antoinette. So with this letter of recommendation in hand, he went through Prague, Dresden, Paris, which was still in upheaval from the French Revolution. Finally, he found his way to London, where he did some work as, I believe, opened some different stores and was also doing tutoring in Italian there. And then eventually won the love of a companion by the name of Nancy Grawl, who he did not marry, but he did have 4 more children with. Finally, in 1805, in the midst of debt and bankruptcy, he fled to the New World. First to New York City, and then to the small town of Sunbury, Pennsylvania, where at first he ran a grocery store and once again tutored in Italian and tried to establish himself as a new resident of the United States. Finally, in 1825, he was able to put together the first U.S. performance of Don Giovanni in New York City. The first opera performance of Don Giovanni in the United States was by the man who wrote the libretto in 1825. But it wasn't just a normal theater. There was no opera house here yet. He also was responsible for introducing Rossini operas in the United States for the first time. In 1828, at the ripe old age of 79, he became a U.S. citizen. And in 1833, when he was 84, he founded the first opera house. So it was the first building that was constructed specifically for the purpose of opera house, a true opera house. Finally, 1838, at the age of 89, he died and was honored with a huge funeral in New York City at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And there ends my favorite story of someone you've probably never heard of, but now will know, Lorenzo da Ponte. So what we talked about last week was the nature of opera, and recurring themes in opera happened to be a return to Grecian dramatic roots and trying to resurrect Greek drama, or what they believed Greek drama to be. And also the overall theme of bringing multiple art forms together to try and create the ultimate theatrical dramatic art form: music and ballet and art song and costumes and sets and everything. So this continued into the 17th century, but finally in the 18th century, there was a burgeoning middle class that was interested, and public opera houses were growing, and as a result, plots of operas started to change. And we see this evidenced in Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, for example, where you start to see, instead of operas about Greek gods and kings and conquerors and great wars, you start to see normal people in extraordinary circumstances, normal human beings like all of us. And it would appeal, of course, to audience members who are not of noble birth, who were able to attend the opera. However, what started to change much of this was between 1789 and 1799. I'm sure Laurence knows exactly what I'm about to say. The French Revolution. Liberté, fraternité, and égalité were the watchwords of the French Revolution. Here's the storming of the Bastille in 1789. So over the course of that 10 years, there were so many changes all over Europe and the world at large brought about by the French Revolution, but all ushered in with the main themes of liberty, freedom, and equality. And ultimately, this helped to bring about the suppression of the feudal system, emancipation of the individual, and abolition of the privileges of noble birth. And of course, it started to accelerate the fall of monarchies and the rise of republics and democracies. And what this helped to bring about in the world of opera was rescue opera. And this is a whole genre of opera where someone is generally rescued, and very often it's a political prisoner. And you can see, as you've come to understand, I absolutely love the context in which these things arise. And in the context of the French Revolution, it makes perfect sense that these opera plot lines were popular. And the scene you're looking at here is from the most famous rescue opera, Beethoven's Fidelio. So this character is Don Pizarro, and this is Rocco, who I think works for, he was his jailer and worked for the prison. And Don Pizarro was the governor of this prison. This is Fidelio, who is, I'm sorry, no, Florestan. Florestan is the husband, and he is a political prisoner of Don Pizarro. And there's an undercurrent the whole time of the opera that eventually the king's minister, Don Fernando, is going to come. And Don Pizarro is going to kill Florestan rather than have Don Fernando find out that he's taken this man as a political prisoner and is actually loyal to the king. This gentleman is in fact his wife in disguise. Leonora is disguised as Fidelio and goes to work in the prison in the efforts to free her husband, which she ultimately does. Now, this is Beethoven's only opera, and he worked on it for over a decade. I started working on it in 1803, and there was actually 3 different versions of, actually 4 different overtures that were written for it. In the concert hall, they are generally known as Leonora number 1, 2, and 3. Leonora number 3 is a very popular concert overture. Eventually, the 4th overture was the one that would become the ultimate final overture to the opera, and it's the Fidelio overture. Also, the opera was originally called Leonora, and it had a subtitle called the Enduring Love of Marriage. But eventually the title was also changed to Fidelio. It was first premiered in 1805 and then revised and revised as Beethoven was wont to do. He was constantly reworking and trying to perfect his work. And in 1814 was very much the version we've come to know and love. And this opera, for now over 200 years, has been in the repertoire ever since. But again, this is an opera about normal people. It's not about gods or Greek myths. This is a playbill from the actual performance in 1814. Like I said, Beethoven was working on this opera for a very long time, and he considered this his greatest work. And to be perfectly honest, I don't agree. I don't think it's as convincing a work as his symphonies, and certainly not as Beethoven 9. But it's a fantastic opera, and it is certainly representative of the times in which it was written, and very moving. And I'm going to show you the last 5 minutes of it. So this is the moment when Fidelio, Leonora, his wife, this is Don Fernando, has given her the key to her husband's chains, and he's finally made a free man. So let's watch this together. tell you, Bernstein's effervescence really comes through in that performance. It's so great. Good. So on to our next story, which now will be about Jacques Offenbach and what would eventually lead all the way to Gilbert and Sullivan and American Music Theater. So Jacques Offenbach, born in 1819, actually composed nearly 100 operettas. And between 1835 and 1855, he actually gained fame all across Europe as both a cellist and a conductor. What he really wanted to do was direct. He wanted to compose operas. So he started composing operas, and his first full-length opera, appropriately, was returning to the roots of opera itself, the story of Orfeo and Eurydice. But he decided to write the ultimate comic version of this. So the original version of this, there are two versions. The original version was only 2 acts in 1858. Although he turned the story upside down, it's amazing. So let me take you through some of the changes. In the original Orpheus, of course, Orpheus was one of the sons of Apollo and had musical gifts, and he used these musical gifts to liberate his wife from the underworld. Well, in this version, Orpheus is not a son of Apollo, but is in fact just a violin teacher. And he actually is in love with his shepherdess named Chloe, and Eurydice is in love with some shepherd. What is his name? Aristeus. And Aristeus, it just turns out, is Pluto in disguise. So Aristeus actually wants Eurydice for himself. And finally, so Aristeus / Pluto basically conspires with Orpheus to get her bitten by a snake. And Orpheus is just fine to be rid of her because she's a real pain. She's a lot of work. So she dies, and Pluto takes her to the underworld, and Orpheus is thinking all is right with the world. But unfortunately for him, the Greek chorus, or public opinion, interferes. So in the classical Greek chorus, the Greek chorus is basically the voice of man, the voice of morality. In Offenbach's Orphée, the Greek chorus takes the personification of an actual character called public opinion. And public opinion is nagging him and telling him that, what he's doing is immoral, and he basically guilts him into going to the underworld to rescue his wife. So finally, begrudgingly, he decides to do it. Now, the god Jupiter, in the next act, overhears that apparently Pluto has this amazing woman that he's kidnapped. And, Jupiter, as he's wont to do, disguises himself or transforms himself into a fly and goes to the underworld and meets her this way. And of course, they fall in love, and he decides to steal her from Pluto, and hilarity ensues. I won't go through all of the other details of it. It's a very complicated plot with a lot of characters. Ultimately, Orpheus is lucky in that he doesn't have to take her back, because when he's rescuing her, as you know, he's not allowed to look at her. But Jupiter throws a lightning bolt to distract him, and he looks back and he sees her. So she's condemned to the underworld once again, and Jupiter decides, well, I'll make her a priest of Bacchus, and that's how he rescues her from a fate with Pluto. So I'm going to show you a quick scene. This is the scene when Jupiter has disguised himself as a fly.
Je l'ai droit qu'au bourdonnement, je l'ai droit qu'au bourdonnement. chanson, la touche, chantons ma chanson.
Ah, la belle mouche, le joli fredon. Bella, c'est quel est le temps rire, veux-tu rester mon compagnon? Ces lieux dont tu forces à montrer, hélas, me servent de prison. Ne me quitte pas, je t'en prie, reste pour prendre bien soin de toi. Ah, je t'aimerai, mon chat joli, reste avec moi, je t'aimerai, mon chat joli.
Quand on veut se faire adorer, il faut se laisser désirer.
Je la tiens par son aile d'or,
Pas encore, pas encore,
je la tiens par son aile d'or.
pas encore, pas encore.
Méchante, la méchante,
J'ai pris des ailes, ma charmante, ma charmante.
la méchante.
J'ai pris des ailes, ma charmante, ma charmante. Chante-moi celle qui fait bien le chante-moi celle qui.
Que cette gaze légère s'en étouffer, je puis faire filer un papillon.
Attention, attention. La plus prise des deux n'est pas celle qu'on pense.
So I'll stop it there because the scene that ensues is definitely rather risque, and I'm not sure it's safe for all eyes here. So I'm going to stop it there. But this clip is available online, and Nathalie Dessay is phenomenal in this role. She's hilarious, and there's several wonderful clips if you look for Orphée and Nathalie Dessay on YouTube. This had mixed reviews, of course, because critics always love to find things they're offended by. And some, of course, were offended by his changing of the Greek myth, and it was a sacrilege to sully these classic myths this way. And also he actually lifted some music from Gluck's Orpheus and Eurydice, and some were offended by that. But of course, this only made people dying to see it even more, and it became very popular. And in 1874, it was a smash hit. At that point, he'd expanded it to 4 acts in several hours. Many of his other operettas became popular all over Europe. And later in his life, he traveled to London, and it was all the rage. He was selling out shows left and right. And this caught the attention of 2 gentlemen by the names of Gilbert and Sullivan. And they started writing English operettas in very much the same vein. And this ultimately led to creations like vaudeville and music theater, and the rest, as they say, is history not to be told today. That's another story. So we're going to take a quick break right here before we dive into Lord of the Rings. So not Lord of the Rings, the Ring Cycle. So if we can, I'm going to stop the share for a minute, and if you want to turn your video back on, I'm happy to entertain any questions. And much like the ending of the Ninth. I agree. The ending of Fidelio, there are similarities to the music of the Ninth. It's got the same ebullience and similar technique on the strings. And that tempo was pretty fast. It's not at all easy to play. It's a real workout for the orchestra, to say the least. So any questions? Oh, Laurence, yeah, hold on. Let me unmute you. Yeah, I think you need to unmute yourself, Laurence. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I was wondering because you mentioned Offenbach operetta. And so I'm just wondering, what's the difference between an operetta and an opera? Because in some ways, there's some Mozart like Così, which are like operettas, or certain aspect of Mozart operas. I mean, what difference is between an opera and an operetta?
When we talk about the trajectory and the many different versions and kinds of opera there are, we don't always distinguish that much between them. But in fact, when you get into the finer details of what opera people refer to, and opera buffs and opera historians refer to as different kinds of operas, it's amazing. All of the little gradations of them. For example, Mozart's Magic Flute is not in fact an opera, it's a Singspiel. And the only difference is because there's dialogue in it. And an actual opera has no dialogue. It is sung dialogue, but there's no spoken dialogue. And a Singspiel, a speak-sing, has spoken dialogue. Now, an operetta traditionally is a shorter opera. It does have spoken dialogue, and it tends to be of a humorous plot. Now, and in 1858, his first version of this was only 2 acts. So it was a shorter work and was more akin to operetta. Now, his ultimate version in 1878, though, had 4 acts, and it had ballooned into a much more opera comique, full opera. But it did start off as just an operetta. So in general, an operetta is a shorter opera. Any other questions before we go on? Somebody's clicking along, so I'm going to mute them, whoever that is. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody want to unmute themselves before we move on? No? Okay, good. So I've remuted everyone. Let's go on. By all means, turn your video off, and we shall move on to the ring cycle. I have lots of fun examples for this. So, not this ring cycle. That's a different ring cycle. But this ring cycle, Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, the Ring of the Nibelung. So, this work, as many of you I'm sure know, is a collection of 4 separate operas, ranging from about 2.5 hours to well over 4 or 5 hours long. They're meant to be watched all together. The 4 operas being Das Rheingold, the Rheingold, Die Walküre, the Valkyrie, Siegfried, and Götterdämmerung, which is Twilight of the Gods. And the 4 operas together are about 15 hours in duration. So before we begin, I'm going to show you a very brief, it's like 3-4 minutes, I think, summary, a little longer than that. But it's a very good summary of the storyline. This is one of the better ones I found.
The Ring, by the German composer Richard Wagner, is a cycle of 4 epic operas: Das Rheingold, Die Walküre, Siegfried, and Götterdämmerung. Begun in 1848, it took Wagner more than 26 years to complete the music and text of this gargantuan work. For sheer scale, few artworks rival The Ring. Its extreme length, 16 hours of music, puts many people off, but The Ring isn't the endurance test people think it is. It's a thrilling story about life, love, and how absolute power corrupts absolutely. You don't need to know everything or anything about opera to appreciate it. All you need are ears to listen and a heart to be stirred. It all begins with a murmur, a repeating, unchanging chord that swells to become the spectacular birth of the natural world, before Wagner plunges us into the depths of the Rhine. There we see 3 beautiful Rhine maidens frolicking in the water. The ring's chief villain, Alberic, sees them too. This lusty dwarf wants to join the Rhine Maidens' pool party. As they mock him for his ugliness, he notices the gold they are guarding. They reveal the Rhinegold's incredible power, telling him that only those who renounce love can possess it. And who would ever do that? To their shock, spurned Alberic does forswear love, seizes the gold, and the beautiful world falls apart. While Alberic forges the Rhinegold into a ring of power, one-eyed Wotan, the chief of the gods, has commissioned the giants Fasolt and Fafnir to build him a mighty fortress, Valhalla. Wotan doesn't want to pay the giants' fee, but Loge, the god of fire, has an idea. He's learnt of Alberic's ring and suggests Wotan steal it and pay his debt with that. Devastated by this theft, Alberic curses the ring to bring misery to its owner. Wotan gives the ring to the giants, but obsesses about getting it back. His efforts to reclaim it, and his preparations for the gods' apocalyptic battle against Alberic's Nibelung, supply the drama for the next 3 operas. All who pursue the ring are damned, be they gods, giants, men or dwarves, each chasing the corrupting but oh so beautiful ring. Part of Wotan's plan involves his son, Siegmund, and his grandson, the fearless Siegfried. Siegfried will fall in love with Brunhilde, the beautiful and fearsome Valkyrie, who is also Wotan's daughter, and of course, Siegfried's aunt. Keep up. Yes, there's a lot of plot in The Ring, but Wagner fills the epic sweep of his story with human detail. Heroism and cowardice, loyalty and betrayal, love and hate. A century before Game of Thrones, he created his own fantasy world in which characters aren't wholly good or bad, but messy mixtures of both. Helpfully, Wagner also provides us with a musical map, a series of clearly identifiable theme tunes called leitmotifs. They are wonderfully simple. How do we know there's a storm coming? We hear thunder. How do we know there's a giant striding towards us? Great, big footsteps. Time to get out the way. Wagner's genius for motifs encodes meaning in every bar of The Ring and subtly links the opera's themes. For example, the motif for Valhalla, the fortress from which Wotan intends to maintain order in the world, employs the same melody as that associated with The Ring, with which Alberic intends to become world overlord. 2 different expressions of power linked by music. This is how Wagner describes nature. Love. A glimmer of gold. And the Nibelung working away in their minds. What is remarkable about the leitmotifs is that they have become an intrinsic part of our culture. You watch any Hollywood movie and there they are, in the score. And speaking of film scores, who doesn't love the ride of the Valkyries, carrying the fallen heroes of the world to Valhalla? As the story spirals towards its climax, the motifs combine and clash with astounding complexity. Musical fireworks on a colossal scale. Calamity is on its way. The agent of destruction will be Brunhilde, sealed away on a mountaintop behind a wall of fire. A strong woman and then some. Brunhilde is passionate, loving, brave and murderous. She builds her own funeral pyre, the flames of which spread to consume all Valhalla. By choosing love over greed, Brunhilde does what no man has been able to do and restores harmony to the world. The Rhine overflows its banks and the fire is extinguished. After passion comes peace. We have come full circle, arrived back where we started, and yet everything has changed. That's the awesome power of The Ring, a power that we can all be part of. It's not Wagner's ring, it's yours.
So some of the overarching themes of Wagner's Ring Cycle have to do with the disruption and ultimate restoration of balance that are brought about by, the stealing of the Rheingold from the Rhine maidens. And there are a lot of historians who consider the Ring Cycle to be proto-cinema. There are a lot of reasons for this, but one of the main reasons is because the visual aspect of these is so strong. There are long stretches in the operas where you're literally just looking at staging and there's no singing going on. It's just glorious orchestral music that is describing a scene, and these poor stage designers and stage directors are holding on for dear life, trying to create images that are worthy of the music. And I heard a stage director, actually he was a stage director here in Seattle, in an interview about launching the Ring Cycle, which he described as the true test for any opera company. And he said, if you can get what you see on stage to look like what this music sounds like, then you're doing a good job, because it's a tall order. We were talking about the entire world coming to an end at the end of this opera. I have a couple of pictures here, but I don't know that they're all that necessary. We can probably skip through these a little bit, but Das Rheingold at the end, finally Valhalla has been built and paid for with the Rheingold in the form of the ring. And it's the entry of the gods into Valhalla at the end of that. And this contraption you see here is from the Metz production in 2012 that has been referred to ever since as the ring machine, because all of these slats can be projected on, and they take all these different shapes, and I'll be showing some of those. So in this scene, they become the walls of Valhalla at the end. In Die Walküre, they become the horses that the Valkyrie are riding on to rescue the wounded soldiers' souls and bring them to Valhalla. And this, I believe, is Brunhilde right there, who is the daughter of Wotan and his favorite child. That'll come back in a moment. And then the next, the end of Walküre, is when Brunhilde, the ultimate archetype of opera itself, has to say farewell to her father Wotan for the last time. It's an important story point, what happens here. So Sigmund and Sieglinde have fallen in love with one another, and they're brother and sister. But they didn't know this growing up. It's your ultimate classical incest story. So these two fallen in love, and they've broken the law, and Wotan basically ordered, the god of gods has ordered that they be killed. And Brunhilde is sent to kill Sigmund and bring him to Valhalla. However, she's so overcome by their story that she can't, by their story of love and how sincere they are, and then discovers that Sieglinde is actually carrying a child, that she can't bring herself to kill them. So he's Wotan's favorite daughter, and he can't bring himself to punish his daughter for not carrying out his law, but he has to punish her because it is his law. And what he ends up doing is putting her to sleep, and he constructs this ring of fire to protect her. But the farewell scene at the end of the second opera between Wotan and Brunhilde is one of the most powerful scenes of opera, and certainly one of the most of the Ring Cycle. And I'll show that to you in just a moment. And then finally, there's Siegfried, which takes place 18 years later. And this son of Sigmund and Sieglinde grows up to be the hero Siegfried, who is, yes, Brunhilde's nephew, because they're all related to Wotan, but whatever. At one point, Wotan has left a sword for him, and there's a dragon here that he has to go and slay, and I won't get into all the transformations of where the dragon came from. Suffice it to say, he gets the ring, and he's able to rescue Brunhilde from this ring of fire. And originally, this was going to be the end. In 1848, when Wagner was writing out his libretto, he wrote his own libretto for the entire opera as well. When he was writing out this libretto, this was going to be the end of the story. And it was meant to have, an optimistic ending. However, Wagner was greatly impacted by being introduced to the philosophy of Otto Schopenhauer when it was 1854. And he describes this as an event that marked a major turning point in his life. Arthur Schopenhauer, his philosophy was in many ways a distillation, a Western distillation of Buddhism. And for a while, Wagner actually was working on an opera, and there are sketches of an opera based on Buddhism and the story of the Buddha. And it was meant to be called The Victors, but it was never completed. It was never even realized in any form. Anyway, because of reading Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer, just as the Buddha refers to the downfall of man, the downfall of humanity is desire itself. Arthur Schopenhauer referred to this as the will to life, the will to better yourself, to search for happiness. And the problem is, we're in a world of chaos, and the idea of happiness is a bit of a fool's errand. And the reason we're so, I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but the reason we're so, why this is our downfall ultimately, is because unlike all of the other animals, we're aware of our mortality. We're aware of our ultimate death. So we're doomed from the start. And Wagner, of course, also saw this as the story of man and the destiny of man. And this brought about the last opera, Götterdämmerung, The Twilight of the Gods, and the idea that the imbalance created would ultimately bring ruin, and does, to these characters. So at the end, Valhalla, Siegfried is killed, Brunhilde dives onto the funeral pyre with the gold ring on, and fire spreads all over Valhalla, and then the Rhine overflows, the Rhine maidens come back, they claim their gold back for the first time, and all is restored, all balance is restored. And this is the last scene in the Met. And you can see now these slats have turned into this wooden structure, and Siegfried having been killed. So, as you no doubt have gathered, this is yet another version of this operatic theme of bringing all of these different art forms together. Wagner's term for this was Gesamtkunstwerk. And he even spelled it wrong. He had trouble with it. He spelled it with 2 M's. So I don't feel so bad about having trouble spelling German myself anymore. But yeah, in Wagner's early writings about all of this in the 1840s, we're going to leave off the fact for today's purposes that a lot of these writings were virulent and anti-Semitic. He really was a terrible anti-Semite and a narcissist and an egomaniac. But what we will be doing today, as I do my best with all programming in history, is to separate the art from the artist. We're talking about the art today. So one of the things he was writing about at the time was that all art and theater and drama was basically a downhill trip from ancient Greece. And once again, it's the theme we started with, that Grecian drama was the perfect exemplar of drama, and that we were constantly trying to come up with an art form as good as that. And this Gesamtkunstwerk, a total artwork, became he would refer to also as the future of opera. And there was actually an article he wrote called The Future of Opera. And it was just a a listing and lengthy descriptions of all of the ways in which he wanted to do this. And eventually he even had to build a new opera house to do it, which we'll get to in just a moment. Now, leitmotif, which was touched on briefly in that video, leitmotif are basically short themes. So we'll go into, I'm going to show you maybe a couple examples of leitmotif on my keyboard. You should be able to hear that. Somebody shoot me a text if you can't hear my piano. As it's an often, it's mistaken often that Wagner invented leitmotif. He did not. He just popularized it so much. And once again, credit goes to the person who invents it so well it never has to be invented again. This is another way also in which Wagner's ring cycle is proto-cinema. Leitmotif have stuck around, and they are in every cinema score. And we'll be talking about that next week when we do our talk about film music in the 20th century. So the first earliest ideas of leitmotif about using a theme and then changing that theme throughout a work to help tell the story. That really could be argued to go back even to Berlioz and Idée Fixe with his Symphony Fantastique, and an earlier opera composer, Weber, in Der Freischütz, the free shooter, about a hunter who had like magic bullets. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of how Wagner would take and use leitmotif. So any character has their own leitmotif in it. The Ring has several leitmotif. This is the leitmotif for the Rhine Maidens. And this is specifically the leitmotif when they're happy. So when we first see the Rhine Maidens, they sound like this. It's a very positive, happy, optimistic scene, and all is right with the world. Then Albrecht steals their gold, and they turn sad, which sounds like this. So it's more or less the same theme, but it's harmonized differently and it takes on a different mood, a different color. But subconsciously, we recognize it as the same theme. And this happens throughout. The music knows things even when the characters don't. And this happens all the time in cinema. We've grown so used to this idea. But this is something that Wagner really cultivated and created that has held on to this day. This is my favorite example of a leitmotif and a brilliant transformation. So this is the leitmotif for Wotan's spear, the spear motive. So every time you see Wotan on stage, he's got this spear, which is meant to be the embodiment of his power and a symbol of his power. And at what you see here, it's just a scale. It's just a scale moving down. So early on, it just sounds powerful, like this. Or maybe we want it to sound a little more ominous at the end. It's just a tiny little change. Well, now I'm going to show you how Wagner turns this into his love theme for his daughter. Love theme for Wotan's daughter at the end. So we start off and I'm playing this in C minor starting on G as written. Now I'm going to turn it into G major. All I've done is change it from minor to major. Now I'm going to switch it into E major. Still, it's just a downward scale. Now, right in the middle of it, we're going to jump up an octave, but instead of that A, we're going to move up an octave. we slow it down. And orchestrated and expanded, it becomes. And what we have is one of the most amazing scenes in opera. And this is the moment when Wotan and there isn't even singing at this great moment. Once again, when Wotan and Brunhilde basically face the fact that he's saying farewell to his daughter, possibly forever. There's no words to follow that, just amazing music. So one of the problems he had in bringing about this total artwork was where to actually produce these massive ambitions for art and opera that he had in mind. And he didn't feel that there was any theater capable of showing Gesamtkunstwerk in Europe at the time. So the next goal was to create the ultimate opera house. And this would become the Bayreuth Festspielhaus, the festival house in Bayreuth. This is actually based on plans for an opera house that was being built in Munich. And then Wagner basically took those plans without permission and started creating his own with this as the basis. I'm going to show you another way in which this is proto-cinema and how, as a matter of fact, I have a picture here that I'm going to show you of, this is the Vienna Opera House, which was opened up in 1869. And one of the things you'll notice here, look at the seats. They all come straight out. And all of these box seats go all the way around, where anybody who's over here has a rather, mediocre view of the stage. They're not going to see what's on the left. They're not going to see all the way to the back. And here, the further back you get on the stage, the worse your view is. Incidentally, the first opera that was shown in this brand new opera house, the Vienna Opernhaus, in 1869 was Mozart's Don Giovanni. It was May 25th, I think. So Wagner's, he wanted everyone to have an equal, unobstructed view of the stage, which is what we now know as stadium seating. Every movie theater you go into has seating based on this. The boxes go all the way around the back, but the whole idea is that you have an unobstructed view of the stage. Here's a more modern picture of the Festspielhaus. And also you see this, I have another picture of this I'll show you in a moment, but you see this hood covering the pit. You notice nobody in the audience can see the pit. And he didn't want, that's how he wanted it as well. He didn't want any distractions between the viewer, listener, and the drama on stage. Very much in the same vein as Gluck, the drama was the point. Now, how did he pay for all of this? Well, he begged, borrowed, and stole. And the person he most frequently stole from was his ardent fan, Mad King Ludwig II of Bavaria. And I believe my mother has a hunting rifle that was commissioned by Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria. So we'll have to talk about that afterwards as well. Anyway, King Ludwig of Bavaria, why was he called Mad King Ludwig? Well, it wasn't just because he was such an ardent fan of Wagner, which he was. It was also because he spent lavishly on building these just incredible and ornate palaces all over Europe. And maybe some of you have visited some. This is Linderhof. And here is the gigantic Herren Chiemsee. And the most well-known is Neuschwanstein. And actually, it occurs to me, I have a better picture of Neuschwanstein here as well. Isn't that astounding? I haven't been there yet, but it's definitely on the short list of places I have to see with my own eyes. So these are places that are worthy of opera. And here is the pit, as I mentioned. So he developed this hood to go over the pit, so you don't actually see the pit orchestra from the stage. And here's a blueprint of what the stage actually looks like. So you can see the pit, and then the audience itself, box seats all along here, but everyone has an unobstructed view going all the way to the back of the stage. And there's all of these countless sets that can be brought down, and all manner of ability to bring in sets from the sides, from the bottom, from the top, just like the Baroque opera houses we would have seen. So it was almost as if he was taking the best of Baroque opera and the best of 19th century opera and designing the ultimate huge concert experience for people. So as far as Wagner's Ring historically in popular culture, well, for many it is opera. There are so many different versions of Brunhilde, but anytime somebody talks about opera and the fat lady singing and seeing somebody in a Viking hat, for many people that's the first thing they think of when they think of opera, and it's Wagner's Brunhilde. To say nothing of associations with Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, I heard an interview with Howard Shore, who composed the music for all three Lord of the Rings film, and for which he won an Oscar for Best Score for the Return of the King, the third of the three films. And the interviewer said, what would you say if I told you that your scores are very Wagnerian? And he said, well, it certainly reminds me of leitmotif. And there were over 40 leitmotif he composed. The Ring itself, the Ring of Power in Lord of the Rings, has over 4 leitmotif all of its own for the rings for different moods. So to end this chat about this very quick tour of Die Walküre, I'm going to show you the very end of the opera, Die Walküre. This is my favorite scene and one of the most convincing scenes that works on stage very, very well. This is Wotan's farewell to Brunhilde at the end of the second opera. And this is the Met broadcast.
Als feuriger Tod, wie dann einst du mir standest, als schweifende Lohe, wie ich dich fand, kann ich dich heut heraufwabende Lohe. Umlodre mir feurig den Fels, Loge, Loga, her!
That is it, my friends. Here ends part 2 of opera edition of Great Turning Point. So please, by all means, everyone turn your video back on. And I would love to entertain any questions as best I can. Hey, Mom, was I right about King Ludwig of Bavaria's gun? Don't you have a gun?
Yes.
That's a
Actually, he did commission it, and we did own it years ago, but it was sold also.
Oh, what a shame! It was such a great
Yeah.
prop. Oh,
I
wow.
know, it was magnificent. It was really a
It was
beautiful
really beautiful. Yeah.
commemorative piece. It was
Yeah.
really, it was to commemorate the 700th Jubilee of the Bavarian Empire.
Wow.
So it was a very beautiful gun.
And here I thought I might inherit it someday. Oh well.
Sorry about that. I think I let it go and I bought another car.
That's probably a good choice. More practical anyway. Anyway, any questions, anyone?
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Please, Deborah.
So the Mets ring machine, do they still use that? Is it?
I believe they do. Yeah. Yeah. They're
Quite awesome.
It's amazing. Yeah. And actually I mean, I could have spent all day today just showing you different examples of how they used it. But this fire scene at the end, I think, is one of the more dramatic ones. And I mean, the fact that they actually show her suspended, you know, like that, it's just immense what they do. And it's the most cinematic scene design that I've ever seen. And what's amazing about it is, you know, when you're seeing, I can't help but feel like it's, in a way, this opera has come full circle, that they've taken elements of cinema and they've turned it on its head with this version of it, because they're using three-dimensional features, and they're actually, because they can't take the audience and give them a different view, they're taking the whole stage itself and showing the audience a different perspective. It's incredible what they did with that production. But you see it becomes forests and the walls, and it becomes water, and it becomes waterfalls, and it's amazing what they do with it. So I'm actually, I'm planning to watch the entire Ring cycle next month, and I'm gonna watch the Mets version. And I think you can, I'm pretty sure you can rent it in HD on Amazon Prime, but I can't remember. But one way or another, I'm gonna watch that production because I know it's available.
What's amazing is how such geometric forms can be so evocative of all those emotions and scenery and everything else. It was really amazing.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, it's funny.
When it first
Go ahead.
When it first came out, it has those incredible noise problems when you had the Valkyrie on them. Did they solve that?
Honestly, I don't know. No, but I'm not surprised. Yeah, the scene, I think they did, because I've seen productions of it since then. You know, there were broadcast HD, and it wasn't noticeable, the sound of it. Yeah, you're right. They actually have the whole thing going up and down, so it looks like they're riding horseback and flying, you know, on flying horses in that scene at the beginning, during the ride of the Valkyrie, and yeah, I didn't notice any sound from the stage, but I don't know, in person maybe you do. I can't say. Yeah, Marna.
Did Wagner come from a wealthy family? And did he fund his opera house, or was that the Bavaria guy who funded the building of the opera house?
No, Wagner was not wealthy in his own right, and he went through many, I mean, I don't think he was, I can't remember his upbringing actually, but there were plenty of periods in his life when he was destitute, plenty. As a matter of fact, last Christmas, you remember we did the Siegfried Edel for all the principals of our orchestra on the Christmas concert. And when that work was originally written, he promised Cosima Wagner that he wouldn't publish it, that he wouldn't sell it. She wanted it kept as, you know, just a gift for them and kept private. But eventually, just because he needed the money, he orchestrated it and published the work. And that was the only reason for that. He also was in hiding in Zurich for years because he'd taken part in some protest movement and was party to burning down. I can't remember what the building was they burned down, but I think it was the Opera House actually. Yeah, and several of his friends were jailed, and he ended up escaping to Switzerland for several years. But because his music was so popular, he had some powerful friends, and they eventually helped him get back into Germany and Austria, and continue his career. But I guess he had plenty of time while he was there to keep musing about the future of opera. Any other questions?
Actually, I had a question from your previous thing. So what was the first opera house in the US that was created by Da Ponte?
Where I didn't tell you about the story about the opera house itself, which is, this man was cursed, Lorenzo da Ponte. I mean, it was just one thing after another in his life. So he constructs this opera house in New York City, and I can't remember the name of it, but and the reason I can't remember the name of it is because it was constructed in 1833, and then I think 2 years later it burned to the ground, and they promptly built it up again in 1838, and then it burned to the ground again in 1841. So I don't know what was going on, but maybe there were pyrotechnics going on inside, because it is opera after all, and they didn't have a lot of flame retardant technology at the time. So I think after the second one, that was that. But this was eventually what would become the location of the first National Opera House. The National Opera House is what was built in New York City in its place.
Perhaps that's where the expression "they burnt the house down" comes from.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I'm sure that's happened many times.
Lively performance.
Yeah, I'm sure that's happened. As a matter of fact, I heard a story once that Wagner had originally intended for the festival at Bayreuth. They still have, it's basically Mecca for Wagner, and they do ring cycles there every single year, and they do Parsifal there as well, and I think Tristan and Isolde and maybe Tannhäuser from time to time, but it's mainly the ring cycle for which it was built that they show there. But his original idea was it was going to be a very Burning Man kind of a festival, and it was going to be very bohemian, and they would show this great production, and at the end they would burn the whole thing down, and they literally intended to do that. But I guess it got so expensive, they decided maybe that's not such a great plan after all, so they just built a permanent opera house. But yeah, the original plan was very much in keeping with his massive ego. Anything else, my friends?
This is fabulous again, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. This is so much fun to put together. You had one more question, Marta?
I do. The storyline of the Ring. Did Wagner actually compose the story, or are those aren't myths that he's retooled? Those were mythic figures that he's made his own story to.
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, he wrote it is based on Teutonic myth, and just like J.R.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Ring, very much of this is based in, I mean, loosely based on Teutonic and Norse mythology, but Northern European in general. But yeah, he did actually come up with the whole story itself on his own. And he composed the whole libretto, so all of the words and the music are all Wagner's. And that's the case with most of his operas, in fact. Yeah.
So when you're feeling in a more controversial mood, you can always do a series on the art and the artists and all the controversies around interesting artists.
That would be interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, there are some.
That would be never ending.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories out there. I mean, Wagner would definitely be on the list. We would probably talk about Alexander Scriabin, who is also just an uncontrollable egomaniac. And Gesualdo, way back in the day, is famous for murdering his wife when he caught her in flagrante with some other man, and he killed them both because he was wealthy. They let him off. But what a fabulous composer he was. So yeah, there's a million stories like that we could tell. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll think about
For
that.
sure.
So next week, a little preview. Next week, on Monday and Wednesday, again, we'll be doing a presentation on the history of film music. The first score composed specifically for a film was by Saint-Saëns. That's next week. Am I not right? Opera Part 3. That's going to come the week after. Yeah, so next week we're going to do film music. We're going to take a break from opera and just do film music. And then the week after that, we're going to do Opera Part 3, which will be 20th century opera. And we're just going to do a quick tour of many different operas, starting probably with Kurt Weill in the early 20th century and Debussy's Pelléas and Melisande, which another work that just changed everything. And we'll end with a female composer, Kaya Seriaho's L'Amour de Loin, Love from Afar, which you may have seen in my little preview video is the Met production, which is all of these streams of lights that are meant to evoke a body of water. It's an amazing piece. So that'll be in 2 weeks. Okay. Bonnie and Denny, I kayaked within 100 yards of your house the other day. Not even that. I was in 50 yards. I grabbed
saw a picture that you were kayaking out here. I wondered where you were. Look nice.
I've had a goal to get all the way around the island. I started at the Wheatleys and I came all the way around, and I very nearly made it to your place, but the waters were so rough at that point. I thought, man, if I don't turn around, I'm never going to make it back. I was exhausted.
Oh.
But it was a good work. It was a good workout.
Good to be cautious, right?
Yeah. I don't know that I was terribly cautious, but Denny, I was wearing a vest this time.
That's good.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you that.
I was going to ask you that too.
And you need to stop here. I've got a truck and can haul you back.
Nah, that's yeah. We'll see. I mean, if the weather turns sour on me, maybe I will one day.
Be safe.
Yeah, it'd be more likely I'll stop by, have some wine, and then get back on my kayak.
Sounds good.
So if you come to Skagit River, you can drop by our house and Laurence's house too. So
Oh, yeah, it's just a couple more miles, right?
yeah. You get a lot of kayakers this way.
That's pretty cool. All right, good. All right, my friends. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. This was a blast, and I will see you all next week.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.